This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include East Carolina's Talk of the Town host, Hinton, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, and political analyst and lobbyist Peg O'Connell. Well, we've got a full show for you this week that includes the Senate's final offer and what might happen on tax reforms, Senate amendments to what will impact abortions in our state, a resolution by the Mining and Energy Commission telling the legislature to stop meddling in fracking, and potential problems implementing Obamacare. Let's get started. Relations between North Carolina's Republican leaders in government grew hot before the July 4th holiday, and House Speaker Tom Tillis expressed his frustration by giving the House the week off. But Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger expressed his frustration by trotting out what he called his final offer on tax reform. While it was a major compromise from previous iterations of the Senate tax plan, there's still some big differences that had to be ironed out. Chris, Governor McCrory said in his press conference this week that the House and Senate have made great progress. In fact, as the week wore on, we hear they're getting closer and closer to consensus. We understood the big sticking point was the corporate income tax. Tell us the House, the Senate, and the governor's position on this issue and how it might be reconciled.
Well, the easy way to think about it is the Senate wants to eventually abolish the corporate income tax. The House wants to lower it, phase in a lowering of the rate. The Senate wants to make it go away. I think that's one sticking point. The other sticking point has been how much either tax plan is actually going to cost the state treasury or the state revenue system. You know, Governor McCrory campaigned and said even after the campaign he wanted a tax reform plan to be revenue neutral. Most people that believe that means bringing in the same amount of money with the new tax system as the old tax system brought in. The last Senate offer that was made public would cost $1 billion a year when fully implemented. The House plan would be $400 to $500 million a year.
Less than what is currently.
Less than what it is currently. So in my mind, neither one is revenue neutral, but Governor McCrory did say at his press conference that he defines revenue neutral as bringing in enough money to meet the needs of the state. I still think one of the big sticking points is actually how much money it costs. And when you try to come to a middle ground, that means you have to adjust some of the taxes that are going to be raised or lowered to come up. It's not quite as easy as when you do a budget.
John, the governor essentially said he didn't trust the projections that were being made by the Senate or the House plan necessarily from the standpoint of he's the one who's charged with administering the budget, regardless of what may happen to the budget itself. He's telling the legislature, let's don't go any further out on revenue projections or on this reform plan until like 2015, and then we can take it from there. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, the argument that the governor was making was not that the revenue projections were rosy. I mean, they were actually fairly conservative, and they were from the legislative staff. His argument was that assumes that we don't have a recession. And it is conceivable that in 2014 or 2015, and there, of course, we have a difference of opinion. There are many Republicans who think that if the health care law, the national health care law is actually implemented, probably won't be, but if it's implemented, that would have a tremendous effect on the economy. Or there might be a hurricane that drains the state's rainy day fund. That was the argument he was making, is we need to have some assurance that if things went awry fiscally, there would be enough money in the rainy day fund.
He wants a little fudge room.
He wants to build up the rainy day fund more in case there's an emergency. That's really what it amounts to.
All right, Henry, the Senate said this week they were making their final offer. This was it. They weren't going to cave anymore. Now, the rumors all during the week were that there was even more compromising that was going on. A lot of speculation from the standpoint that if the Senate does have to give considerably, they're going to want a pound of flesh somewhere in this, in the budget plan or something like that.
A pound of something. I mean, the way the whole session has gone, the Senate has been driving a lot of the agenda, and the House has been, and the governor's office has been playing catch up. You know, the one thing too, going back to the issue of the revenue projections out as far as 2015. The other thing too, you have to look at it from the political implications. Pat McCrory doesn't want to run out of money in 2015
because he's got to run again in 16.
And you know what happens if these projections don't show up to be accurate in 2015? He now is looking at having to do what? Raise taxes in 2015 to try to make up the shortfall, and then he's got to run in 2016. So the Senate really has kind of backed him into a box.
Well, Peg, he kind of laid down the gauntlet this week in his press conference earlier in the week. He essentially told the lawmakers either get this thing resolved, this week or certainly early next week, or put it off until next year. My question is, if they follow that advice, how's that going to impact the budget?
Well, we won't see a budget until somebody makes some decisions on what kind of revenue stream we're going to have. I think the governor is finally stepping in and saying, we need to get our business done. I mean, the two major things that the Republican majority came to town to do, one is pass a budget in a timely fashion, and two, to do some sort of tax reform. And now we're in the middle of July and they haven't done either. So I think the governor's sort of patting them on the back of the head and going, get along, boys, get along.
One of the things that's been interesting in this is that for much of this legislative session, Pat McCrory has been almost invisible. And now all of a sudden he's asserting himself. Why is that, Chris?
Well, I think for a couple of reasons. One, he's the elected leader of the state. He's supposed to be the adult in the room when legislators are fighting. I think I wish he'd have done it a little bit earlier, but I do applaud him for trying to get things to move along. And if the rumors at the end of the week about a compromise were true, and then they can get something done soon, that's one thing. But I think the worst scenario would be for them to drag this into late July, even if they get a tax reform plan to pass the budget. In 2009, Phil Berger said on July 14th, it's a sign of gross incompetence that the Democrats can't get a budget passed. Well, it's July 14th as we sit here and do the show, and there's not a budget passed.
Henry, one of the things that the House Speaker Tillis had a caucus Monday night of this week, and he told the legislators in his caucus, clear the decks, get the legislation either passed or decide that it's going to be held over to the next session, because we're going to get this tax reform plan done, we're going to get the budget passed, and we're going to be out of here before the end of July. How's that looking?
Well, the problem is you can't really do anything. You can't do a budget. You can't really do hardly any of the other legislation that's on the table until they figure out what the tax reform is going to be. Yeah. It's really holding up everything over there right now, and it's becoming a real problem. But I will say this: But
what are the predictions about when they might finally adjourn? End of July? Is that a reasonable projection?
It could still happen, but it could also go in a little bit into August. I don't think it's going to be forever.
I heard somebody say December the other day, so I'm not. Well, I'd like to tell you I'm not making any plans, but I've made plans.
I think the budget is maybe the most important thing, not when they adjourn. If they get to the end of July and they don't have a budget and they have to pass another continuing resolution, I think that is a huge political losing. But
I understand there are big issues still in the budget.
Well, there are some.
There are. Yeah. I mean, they're in this tension that these two things are causing is making everything else
There's
harder
normal
and harder
tension
and harder.
that goes on between the House and Senate, but this year has really been exacerbated.
On steroids.
Yeah. Well, you can watch NC Spin anytime you want. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, and click on the YouTube button on the right side of the page. We post each week's show on Friday, so view us anytime you like. And while at ncspin.com, be sure to sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle, and follow us on Twitter at NCSpinTweets. 4 ways to keep the conversation going: ncspin.com, NCSpin on Facebook, and Twitter at NCSpinTweets. Finally, Spin Cycle. We look forward to hearing from you. When we come back after these messages, abortion raises its head again.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Our farmers are among the most productive in the world, even while lacking a stable and reliable agricultural workforce. But the workforce problems in agriculture have reached a breaking point, and food demand continues to rise. Reforms to the immigration system can ensure that farmers have access to the workers they need. The good news is that we still have time to fix this corrosive problem. Tell your congressional representatives that we need comprehensive immigration reform in 2013.
The North Carolina Medical Society is committed to a healthier North Carolina. We feel, as an organization representing over 14,000 physicians, that we have a responsibility and an obligation to help our citizens become more healthy. And by doing this, we want to help educate them about ways in which they need to keep themselves healthy through good nutrition, exercise, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. These ingredients will help not only individual citizens become and maintain a healthier outlook on their lives, but also help contribute to having a healthier state.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception: keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
Just before adjourning for the July 4th holiday, the Senate amended a bill dealing with foreign laws in North Carolina family courts to include several ideas that have been floating around the legislature this session. If passed, abortion clinics would be required to meet standards of outpatient surgery clinics, would require doctors to be present when pills that induce abortions are given patients, and they would outlaw private health care plans that include abortion services from future health care exchanges under the Affordable Care Act. Well, as could be understood, women were incensed that it was brought up in such a way on such short notice. Governor Pat McCrory had a really interesting week dealing with this subject. First, he issued a statement that left many wondering whether he was for it or against it, the Senate bill. Then on Wednesday, he announced he was going to veto the Senate bill just hours before it was announced a compromise had been reached. Did he not know about the compromise when he made that statement?
Well, maybe his threatened veto created the compromise. I mean, that's what I think happened. Things weren't confusing enough over there, and now we got an abortion bill, and I don't think anybody was really anticipating this late in the session to be dealing with a controversial abortion bill. I will say this, though. I believe that McCrory and Tom Tillis both showed good leadership with the way that they dealt with it. The Senate came out with a bill. It was kind of a surprise to everybody. The governor took a look at the bill, saw some things he didn't like. The House held a public hearing, which the Senate did not.
Tuesday, yeah.
The Secretary of Health and Human Services, Aldona Voss, goes over there and says, look, we got some issues with this. And then after looking at it further, the governor says, look, the issues have to be compromised. This bill has to be changed, or I'm going to veto this bill.
Well, let's talk about that.
And so as a result of that, that's when they got to work in the House to get the compromise. So I think McCrory and Tillis really showed good leadership.
Well, I think it's possible that the compromise was ongoing before that. But Peg, let's talk about the way the House did this from the standpoint of everybody was so critical that the way that the Senate tacked this on as an amendment to sort of an unrelated bill. The House essentially did the same thing. They stuck it into a motorcycle bill, for gosh sakes.
With no notice.
With no notice.
Now, the explanation and the justification from this, Ruth Samuelson said, hey, look, we had a 2-hour public hearing on this. It was fairly obvious that that bill was not acceptable, wasn't going to pass. This is the reason why we did it this way. Does that make it justifiable?
I think this is all a great amount of theater. I mean, we've talked about why do this right now when you can't pass a budget and you can't get a tax reform bill passed. Then you take a page out of Jesse Helms' book, which is throw a socially divisive issue in the middle of the table, and everybody starts screaming and running around like crazy. So I think that's where it came from. I think having a hearing is a good thing. I think observing the process and starting with a bill and a bill number and moving it through the legislature in an appropriate fashion, I think that's the way you're supposed to go on these big issues, not throw things to motorcycle bills at the last
John,
minute.
let's talk about the issues of the bill. The compromise bill, as we understood it, was going to loosen the requirements that abortion clinics didn't have to have the same laws and regulations as same-day surgery centers. Also, the business about women who were taking pills to create abortions or induce abortions, the compromise bill said the doctor has to be present for the first pill, but the patient can take the remaining pills themselves.
Which should be more like other medications.
Does this make it more palatable?
I assume so. That's why they developed it as compromise. Remember that many of these provisions that ended up in the Senate bill and then ended up in the House compromise bill had been filed and held and discussed in committee a long time ago as separate measures in the House. So these were not things that just, like Athena out of the mind of Zeus suddenly appeared. They actually been around for the whole session, but they weren't in a bill. That's the surprise. And I agree about the process criticism, but these were not things that came out of nowhere. And remember, there are lots of people, including lots of North Carolinians, who watched that horrendous case in Pennsylvania, watched some problems in abortion clinics in North Carolina in the last couple of years, and are genuinely concerned about abortion.
But Chris, this follows the 2011 Women's Right to Know bill, where we had to have a 24-hour cooling off period.
Women had to be shown, exception for rape or incest.
Yeah, women had to be shown the ultrasound and so forth like this. I guess my question is, when I was asking John, how's this going to settle? What's the impact? How are women left with this? How are they feeling about this now, about the abortion issue?
Judging by the fact that there were 600 people protesting the Senate bill with 12 hours notice, I don't think they're too happy about it. It was a significant number of the folks out on this past Moral Monday who were people who were upset about this bill. I think this process is an abomination. It's one of the worst things I've ever seen. You bring up the most socially divisive issue facing our society the last 2 or 3 weeks of a session with no notice in the Senate. The House, yes, had a public hearing, but the next morning there was no notice when a whole new bill came out. People were at the committee meeting. They didn't even have copies of the bill, and this affects a woman's fundamental health care right. I still think the compromise, and I'm not sure it's a compromise, I still think it does potentially restrict a woman's right to seek health care services. Remember, Pat McCrory said he wouldn't sign that.
Republicans want to get rid of abortion altogether, don't they?
Well, let me say a word about why I think it got stuck. The House bill got stuck into the motorcycle bill. I think there's some gamesmanship there. I think there's some, the Senate has been the group pushing these motorcycle issues. The bill, seriously,
it was a Senate bill.
The bill that they stuck the abortion compromise in was the motorcycle bill.
Yeah.
So think about that for a second. If the Senate wants these motorcycle issues passed, they're going to have to accept the House compromise. I mean, to me, it's just kind of classic legislative gamesmanship where they've stuck something in there that the Senate's going to have to agree
Final
with.
comment, Peg.
Well, if Republicans say they want women to vote for them, and then they do this kind of stuff, which almost diminishes an entire gender in the entire state, it's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. If you think women are going to vote for these Republicans, it's not going to happen.
Fits starts in the Obamacare Act. We're going to talk about that after these messages.
NC Spin will return after these messages. We all count on our community hospitals, but funding cuts are hurting hospitals' ability to care for our families. Continued government cuts may force hospitals to eliminate vital services like emergency rooms and delivering babies. Some hospitals may even be forced to close their doors. We need healthy hospitals that are financially strong. Please contact your legislator. Help protect your community's hospital and your family.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
NCAnimalAg.com. North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but we consistently rank in the bottom third for state health. Poor health choices and inactivity cost our state $54 billion a year, dollars that could be saved through healthier living. We can do better, North Carolina. That's why NC Spin is working with health and community organizations to launch A Healthier NC, an education campaign and challenge to live healthier lives. Join us at ahealthierNC.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
Just before the holiday break, President Obama announced a one-year moratorium on small businesses having to provide insurance for their employees. The Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare, has run into snags in many states, with the threat, for instance, in Mississippi, that they're going to do away with Medicaid altogether. Come October, health insurers can enroll patients in the new health insurance exchanges, but reports across the country, and particularly in North Carolina, indicate few insurance companies are ready to provide that coverage. Peg, we've got 1.5 million uninsured people in our state. Some 1 million are expected to enroll in these subsidized health insurance exchanges, but 3 of the top 4 companies in the nation have opted not to participate in North Carolina. What does this say about ACA here?
Okay, well, there's 3 parts to that question. First, Medicaid is alive and well in Mississippi, so don't worry about that anymore.
Well, the Senate had to come together and pass it.
Yes, but it's a fine.
All right.
Secondly, the postponed mandate is not for small business, it's for businesses with 50 employees or more, so it's larger businesses. But the main part of that question is, anything with as many moving pieces and parts as the Affordable Care Act is always going to have implementation issues. And I don't think the fact that the top 3 health insurers in the country aren't writing in North Carolina is a big deal for ACA, because they're not writing here now.
But 3 of the 12 that are operating here have only applied to
a tiny, tiny little part of the market. So you've got Blue Cross and they're offering 25 plans. You've got Coventry, which is the second largest writer, are offering 24, 25 plans. And now you've got First Carolina Care coming out of Moore County that's stepping up to write in their catchment area. So you're going to have choices in the marketplace. You're going to have capacity. More would be better, absolutely. But, Tom, insurers are by their very nature risk adverse. I admire Blue Cross and Coventry and First Carolina Care for stepping up. I think we'll see more come in once they figure out what the market looks like.
Earlier part of the week, House Speaker John Boehner in Congress came out and essentially applauded the president for postponing the requirement for having businesses to cover their employees. But he took it a step further and he said, hey, wait a minute, I think we ought to postpone having to make anybody have to have health insurance in 2014 when the law originally calls for it. Any chance of that?
The president will not accept that, because that is an admission of defeat. The implementation of the Affordable Care Act is a sort of a slow-moving, slow-motion disaster movie. And he does not want to he wants to speed that up and show the plane crashing immediately. He wants it to take a few more years. But the fundamental problem here is that once the mandate on business is only the latest of a number of delays or never mind. A big chunk of the exchanges has now been winked at, because they're not going to check anybody's information when they apply for the exchanges, apply for policies under the exchanges that get subsidies. That in itself kind of makes the individual mandate a bit questionable.
Chris, we've got a whole bunch of problems with Medicaid in our state. Wouldn't it be wise for us to slow down and wait a year before we add another 1 million people to the Medicaid rolls?
We're not adding more to Medicaid.
We're not to Medicaid.
Well, it's on the health insurance. Okay, that's right. It's health insurance.
These are people that don't have health insurance that will now have to buy it, who don't qualify for Medicaid. Some of them will get subsidies. Some of them.
I stand corrected.
But I do think this is a very complicated law. We knew that going in. I do think a lot of people have vested political interest in making sure that it doesn't work. There are a lot of Republican governors, as we talked about before, Chris Christie, prominent among them, Jan Brewer in New Mexico, Republicans who wanted to not only expand Medicaid, but want the Affordable Care Act to work in their states. At some point, John Boehner has voted how many times to try to repeal Obamacare? It's the law. It was passed. Maybe
I got that. But Henry, this is the most unpopular law that I can remember in my lifetime.
Well, and I think that's another reason why they're delaying the implementation for the business side of it for a year. I mean, think about it. It was going to be implemented in 2014. What else is big about 2014?
It's an election year.
Midterm elections. And, I'll tell you, as a business guy, I'm ground zero with this stuff. And I talk to my insurance people, and people still don't understand it, Tom. It's a really difficult thing to understand the different parts of it and how it's going to affect people's health care. It's going to change their health care.
Well, the rules and regulations aren't even finished
change their business.
Yet.
But I think Speaker Boehner was right too. To change it for the businesses and not change it for individuals and families right now, I think that's going to come back to haunt the president and Obama. And I think when it does get implemented, Peg, it's going to be such a disaster. They don't want that happening during an election year.
Well, be that as it may, this is fast backwards to 1965, and we're having the same conversation about Medicare. And it's never going to work. It's socialized medicine. It's the end of medicine as we know it. Nobody will ever be. And Medicare has, when you look at the life expectancy charts of people in the United States, the day they started going up is the day Medicare was implemented.
But this is not Medicare.
This
is not Medicare.
It's the same. No.
Life expectancy was going up before the implementation of Medicare, and it continued to go up after Medicare.
Medicare is very popular. Try to repeal that.
That's true. I mean, everything that's important and big.
Good luck with that. Well, but the whole government,
Medicare did not have 35% support.
The whole government crammed down on the Obamacare thing, using the IRS as part of the package. Threatening
that was the
businesses.
Supreme Court. I mean, you're going to take that up with John Roberts.
No, that's not.
That was the bill.
That was in the bill. The original bill was that it was the first time that they'd ever used the IRS to penalize people for doing something other than that had something to do with their taxes.
While these guys sort all of that out, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a fraction over fracking.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
We all count on our community hospitals, but funding cuts are hurting hospitals' ability to care for our families. Continued government cuts may force hospitals to eliminate vital services like emergency rooms and delivering babies. Some hospitals may even be forced to close their doors. We need healthy hospitals that are financially strong. Please contact your legislator. Help protect your community's hospital and your family.
Is your business or trade organization looking for a great North Raleigh address? This beautiful, recently updated office building has 3 spacious offices perfect for law firms, accountants, agencies, and associations of any size. Our beautiful lobby boasts attractive finishes and unique Raleigh artwork. We provide ample parking and quick access to both 440 and 540 right at the corner of Falls of the Neuse and Spring Forest Road. Call us today at 919-832-1416 to schedule a tour with the owner.
It's always hard to say goodbye, but particularly so right now as we say so long to Henry Hinton. This is his last show with us. He's going on the UNC Board of Governors. Henry, I think I speak for all of us on the panels, for the audience, for the whole staff in saying we know you're going to serve our state well. We're going to miss you, and we want you back as soon as we can get you.
I appreciate it, Tom. I'll miss you guys. I'll be watching.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback and read our columns. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina, including fracking. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.